March 10, 1943. Washington, D.C. A cold rain washed over the Capitol as Walter Jenkins hunched over his workbench in a secluded basement room of the Office of Strategic Services headquarters. His calloused fingers, stained with engine grease that never seemed to wash away completely, delicately arranged small gears from a captured German encryption device. The 32-year-old mechanic from Harlem believed he was simply repairing another broken machine, unaware that within 4 weeks, his unconventional approach to patterns would unravel an entire spy network that had eluded America's top intelligence experts for nearly a year. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable account of how one man's unorthodox thinking, born from a lifetime of solving mechanical puzzles, would transform the Allied counterintelligence effort and save countless lives, all while fighting battles on 2 fronts, against foreign enemies abroad and prejudice at home. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the small basement window as Walter Jenkins squinted under the harsh fluorescent light. The basement workspace was a far cry from the sophisticated laboratories upstairs, where dozens of white-collar analysts and mathematicians worked on decrypting enemy communications. Walter had been assigned to the mechanical division, tasked with maintaining and repairing the various machines used by the intelligence services. He preferred it this way. Machines made sense to him in a way people often didn't. They had rules, patterns, and when something wasn't working, there was always a logical reason. "Jenkins, are you still down here?" The voice belonged to Captain Thomas Holloway, Walter's direct superior, and one of the few officers who treated him with a modicum of respect. "Yes, sir. Just finishing up with this gear assembly," Walter replied, not looking up from his work. Captain Holloway approached the workbench, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete floor. "That's the device from the German agent we apprehended in Baltimore last week. Intelligence thinks it's some kind of specialized encryption tool, but no one can make heads or tails of it. The brass just wants to know if you can get it operational so our code breakers can study it." Walter nodded, his eyes still fixed on the intricate mechanism. "I think I can, sir. The damage isn't as bad as it looks. Whoever designed this was thinking differently about how gears should interact. It's unusual." "Well, that's why we brought you in, Jenkins. You've got a knack for the unusual," Captain Holloway said, with a hint of a smile. "Just document everything you do. The boys upstairs will want to know exactly how it works." After Captain Holloway left, Walter returned to his methodical examination of the device. Unlike the other mechanics who had been recruited from automotive factories and repair shops across the country, Walter had learned his trade in the cramped spaces of Harlem, where resourcefulness was as valuable as technical knowledge. Growing up, he had developed a reputation for being able to fix anything, from automobile engines to radios to elaborate clocks. His father had been a Pullman porter, one of the few stable jobs available to black men of his generation, and had instilled in Walter a meticulous attention to detail. "Everything has a rhythm to it, son," his father would say. "Find the rhythm, and you'll find the problem." Walter had found more than just problems over the years. He had discovered patterns where others saw only chaos. This unique perspective had eventually caught the attention of a recruitment officer who was desperately seeking individuals with mechanical aptitude for the war effort. Despite the prevalent discrimination that limited opportunities for black Americans in the military and government service, Walter's exceptional skills had earned him a place in the OSS, albeit in a basement workshop far from the decision-makers. As he carefully disassembled the German device, Walter noticed something peculiar about its construction. The gears were arranged in a pattern that seemed inefficient for simple encryption. They overlapped in ways that created unnecessary friction and would likely lead to faster mechanical wear. This wasn't poor design. It was intentional. "Why would someone deliberately build in a weakness?" he muttered to himself. Walter spent the next several hours meticulously documenting each component, drawing detailed diagrams and making notes about the unusual arrangement. By midnight, he had the device partially reassembled and was beginning to form a theory. This wasn't just an encryption tool, it was something more specialized, perhaps designed for a specific type of message or communication channel. The next morning, Walter arrived early and found a sealed envelope on his workbench. Inside was a brief note from Captain Holloway. Jenkins, thought these might help. Intercepts from the same network. Don't share with anyone else. Th. Accompanying the note were several pages of intercepted messages that had been linked to the German spy ring but remained undecrypted. Walter wasn't a codebreaker. That wasn't his job. But Captain Holloway had clearly seen something in him worth trusting. Walter spent that day alternating between working on the device and studying the intercepted messages. The patterns in the messages seemed to correspond to the unusual gear arrangements. By the end of his shift, he had filled a notebook with observations and theories. On March 12th, Walter was summoned to Captain Holloway's office. The small room was Spartan, with just a desk, 2 chairs, and several filing cabinets. Maps of Europe covered one wall, with red pins marking key locations. "Jenkins, tell me about your progress," Captain Holloway said, gesturing for Walter to sit. Walter opened his notebook. "Sir, I believe this device isn't a standard encryption tool. It's designed for a very specific purpose, to encode information that appears to be ordinary technical data, the kind of information that might be found in routine industrial reports or mechanical specifications." Captain Holloway leaned forward. "Go on." "The device has an unusual gear pattern that creates what I would call a rhythmic signature. It's similar to how different engines have distinctive sounds. I've been comparing this signature to the intercepted messages, and I'm seeing correlations." "Are you saying you can decrypt these messages?" Walter shook his head. "Not exactly, sir, but I think I can identify which parts of these seemingly innocent communications contain hidden messages. The device creates a very specific pattern of redundancies, for lack of a better word, like a mechanic who deliberately uses more parts than necessary to hide the true function of a machine." Captain Holloway considered this for a moment. "That's not at all what our codebreakers have been looking for. They've been treating these as conventional ciphers." "That's the brilliance of it, sir. It's not about substituting letters or using a complex mathematical formula. It's about hiding information within technical specifications that would seem normal to anyone reviewing them. Only someone looking for the mechanical inefficiencies would notice something amiss." For the first time, Captain Holloway looked genuinely impressed. "How soon can you prove this theory?" "Give me 2 days with the intercepts, sir. I'll need to create a template based on the mechanical patterns." 2 days later, Walter returned to Captain Holloway's office with several pages of notes and highlighted sections of the intercepted messages. "These highlighted sections, sir, they're the only parts that match the rhythmic pattern of the device. The rest is just genuine technical information about industrial equipment, shipping manifests, and mechanical specifications." Captain Holloway studied the pages. "And what do these highlighted sections mean?" "I don't know yet, sir. That's still a conventional cipher that needs to be broken. But now your codebreakers won't waste time trying to find meaning in the entire document. They can focus just on these sections." Captain Holloway picked up his phone. "Get me Major Harrington in cryptanalysis, immediately." What followed was a flurry of activity. Walter found himself explaining his methodology to a room full of skeptical cryptanalysts, most of whom had advanced degrees from prestigious universities and little interest in the insights of a black mechanic from Harlem. Major Richard Harrington, the head of the cryptanalysis division, was particularly dismissive. "Captain Holloway, with all due respect, we've had our best minds working on these intercepts for months. I find it hard to believe that a mechanic has found something we've missed." Walter stood silently as the 2 officers spoke about him as if he weren't in the room. It was a familiar experience, being simultaneously visible and invisible, his presence acknowledged but his humanity diminished. Captain Holloway, to his credit, stood firm. "Major, I understand your skepticism, but Jenkins here has identified something specific to this network's methodology. It's worth exploring." "Very well," Major Harrington conceded. "We'll assign a junior analyst to test this theory. If there's anything to it, we'll know soon enough." That junior analyst turned out to be Eleanor Hayes, a 25-year-old mathematics graduate from Vassar College, who had joined the OSS after her fiancé was killed at Pearl Harbor. When she arrived at Walter's workshop the following day, Her expression made it clear that she considered this assignment beneath her. "Mr. Jenkins, I'm Eleanor Hayes from Cryptanalysis. I've been asked to evaluate your theory." Her tone conveyed exactly what she thought of that theory. Walter nodded, unsurprised by her attitude. "Miss Hayes, I appreciate your time. I've prepared these notes explaining my methodology." Eleanor took the notebook with visible reluctance. "Major Harrington has given me 3 days to determine if there's any merit to your approach. I should warn you that we've tried nearly every known cryptographic technique on these messages. I understand, Miss Hayes, but with respect, you've been looking for the wrong thing. This isn't about cryptography as much as it is about mechanical efficiency and patterns." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "And you're an expert in cryptography now?" "No, ma'am. I'm an expert in machines and how they work, or how they're designed to appear to work while doing something else entirely." Walter's voice remained even, betraying none of the frustration he felt. For the next 3 days, Walter and Eleanor worked in uncomfortable silence, broken only by occasional questions or clarifications. Despite her initial skepticism, Eleanor was thorough in her analysis, meticulously testing Walter's methodology against the intercepted messages. On March 18th, Eleanor arrived at the workshop with a different expression, one of grudging respect. "You were right," she said without preamble. "The sections you identified do contain encrypted information distinct from the rest of the text. And once isolated, they're actually using a relatively simple substitution cipher." Walter couldn't help but smile. "So you can read them now?" "Some of them, yes. They're primarily reporting on Allied shipping movements, industrial production figures, and military deployments. But here's the interesting part. They're being transmitted as part of legitimate industrial reports and technical documents, passing right through our sensors because they look like ordinary specifications." Eleanor placed several decoded messages on the workbench. "This is significant, Mr. Jenkins. This network has been operating under our noses for months." Walter studied the decryptions. "Have you informed Major Harrington?" "Yes, he's reluctantly impressed. He's convening a meeting this afternoon with counterintelligence. You've been requested to attend." The meeting took place in a secure conference room on the 3rd floor of the OSS headquarters, an area Walter had never been permitted to enter before. When he arrived, escorted by Eleanor, the room fell silent. 8 senior officers sat around a large table, with maps and documents spread before them. Major Harrington spoke first. "Jenkins, I understand we owe you an apology. Your mechanical approach has proven valuable. Miss Hayes has briefed me on your findings, but I'd like you to explain your methodology to the group." Walter stood and carefully explained his discovery, how the German device created a specific mechanical pattern that could be used to identify the sections of text containing hidden messages within otherwise legitimate technical documents. "It's like listening to an engine, sir," he concluded. "Every engine has its own sound. Once you know what to listen for, you can hear when something's wrong, or in this case, when something's deliberately designed to sound wrong in a very specific way." Colonel William Donovan, the director of the OSS, who had joined the meeting midway through Walter's explanation, nodded thoughtfully. "Ingenious, and you say this could help us identify other communications from this network?" "Yes, sir. Now that we know the pattern, we can scan all technical documents and industrial reports for the same rhythmic signature." Colonel Donovan turned to Major Harrington. "How quickly can we implement this?" Major Harrington cleared his throat. "We've already begun, sir. Miss Hayes has trained a team to identify the signature, and we're re-examining all technical communications from the past 6 months. We've already found 15 additional messages that appear to use the same methodology." "Excellent," Colonel Donovan said. "Jenkins, I understand you're normally assigned to mechanical repairs. Consider yourself reassigned to this project, effective immediately. You'll work directly with Miss Hayes and report to Captain Holloway." Walter was stunned. "Thank you, sir." As the meeting concluded, Walter found himself walking alongside Colonel Donovan. "Jenkins, Captain Holloway tells me you learned your mechanical skills in civilian life." "Yes, sir. I had a repair shop in Harlem before the war." Colonel Donovan nodded. "This country doesn't always recognize talent where it exists, but in the OSS, I need results more than I need to maintain the social order. Keep up the good work." Over the next week, Walter and Eleanor established a remarkably effective partnership. Her cryptographic expertise complemented his mechanical insights, and together they refined the methodology for identifying and decrypting the hidden messages. The initial coolness between them had given way to mutual respect, though they maintained a professional distance. "These spies are clever," Eleanor remarked one evening as they worked late. "Using technical documents as cover is brilliant, because the language of engineering and mechanics is already so precise and specific that additional encoded information doesn't stand out." Walter nodded. "It's also perfect because these kinds of documents pass through many hands without raising suspicion. A shipping manifest or a mechanical specification doesn't trigger the same scrutiny as a personal letter might." "How did you see it when no one else did?" Eleanor asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Walter considered the question. "I think it's because I've spent my life working with machines that other people have given up on. When you don't have the luxury of buying new parts or replacing an entire engine, you learn to see patterns and connections that might not be obvious at first glance." By March 25th, their methodology had been fully implemented across all OSS stations on the eastern seaboard. Technical documents, industrial reports, and mechanical specifications were now routinely screened for the distinctive pattern Walter had identified. The results were immediate and dramatic. Captain Holloway burst into the workshop, his normally composed demeanor replaced with excitement. "Jenkins, Hayes, we've hit the jackpot." Counterintelligence just arrested 3 individuals in Philadelphia, based on information from the decrypted messages. They were posing as engineering consultants for a shipyard. Eleanor looked up from her work. "Were they able to recover any documents?" "Better than that," Captain Holloway replied. "They found another encryption device, almost identical to the one Jenkins worked on, and a list of contacts across 5 cities. Walter felt a surge of pride. "How many contacts, sir?" 23 names, and we're cross-referencing them with the companies mentioned in the decrypted messages. This could blow the entire network wide open." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Walter and Eleanor were now at the center of a major counterintelligence operation. Each morning brought news of additional arrests or intercepted communications. By the end of March, the count of identified German agents had risen to 37. On April 1st, Walter was working alone in the workshop when Colonel Donovan himself walked in, accompanied by Captain Holloway. "Jenkins," Colonel Donovan said without preamble, "your work has exceeded all expectations. As of this morning, the total number of German agents identified through your methodology stands at 57. Counterintelligence believes that represents nearly the entire East Coast network." Walter stood at attention. "Thank you, sir. Miss Hayes deserves much of the credit for implementing the system effectively." "Miss Hayes has already received my commendation," Colonel Donovan replied. "But this operation began with your insight. That deserves recognition." Captain Holloway stepped forward holding a small box. "Jenkins, this is unusual, but these are unusual times. Colonel Donovan has authorized a field promotion and commendation." Walter stared in disbelief as Captain Holloway opened the box to reveal the insignia of a warrant officer. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "You've earned it," Colonel Donovan said firmly. "The knowledge you've provided has not only dismantled a major espionage network, but also given us insight into German intelligence methodology that may prove valuable throughout the war effort." Later that day, Walter found himself sitting alone in the workshop, turning the warrant officer insignia over in his hands. His thoughts were interrupted by Eleanor's arrival. "I heard the news," she said. "Congratulations, Warrant Officer Jenkins." Walter smiled. "Thank you, Miss Hayes. I'm still getting used to it." Eleanor sat down across from him. "I also heard we've reached 60 confirmed agents. That's an entire network in just under a month." "It's hard to believe," Walter admitted. "Not for me," Eleanor said quietly. "Not anymore." She hesitated before continuing. "I owe you an apology, Walter. When we first met, I made assumptions about you based on prejudices I was raised with. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Walter met her gaze. "You're not the first, Miss Hayes, and you won't be the last, but you were willing to test my theory on its merits. That's more than most would have done." "Call me Eleanor, please," she smiled. We're colleagues now, after all. The following day, April 2nd, Walter received a sealed envelope containing a brief but significant memo. He was being transferred to a newly formed unit dedicated to analyzing enemy technology and identifying hidden communication methods. He would be one of the senior technical advisors, working alongside engineers and scientists who had previously dismissed his insights. That evening, as Walter packed up his tools in the basement workshop for the last time, he reflected on the extraordinary series of events that had unfolded since that rainy March day when Captain Holloway had first brought him the damaged German device. In less than a month, his understanding of mechanical patterns had uncovered what traditional cryptanalysis had missed for nearly a year. "Ready for your new assignment?" Captain Holloway asked from the doorway. "As ready as I'll ever be, sir," Walter replied. "You know, Jenkins, when I first brought you that device, I had a hunch you might see something others had missed, but I never imagined it would lead to all this." Walter carefully closed his toolbox. "My father always said that machines don't lie, sir. They do exactly what they're designed to do, even when that design is meant to deceive. You just have to learn how to listen to them." Captain Holloway nodded. "Well, thanks to your listening skills, 60 German agents are now sitting in custody instead of feeding information back to Berlin. I'd say that's a good month's work by any standard." As Walter Jenkins left the basement workshop behind, he carried with him more than just his toolbox and his new rank. He carried the validation of his unique perspective, a perspective shaped by a lifetime of solving problems with limited resources and recognizing patterns where others saw only chaos. In a world that had consistently underestimated him, he had proven that sometimes the most valuable insights come from the most unexpected sources. The rain had stopped, and a clear April evening greeted him as he stepped outside. Somewhere across the Atlantic, German intelligence officers were undoubtedly trying to understand how their carefully constructed spy network had unraveled so completely and so quickly. They would never guess that their undoing had begun with a black mechanic from Harlem who understood not just how machines worked, but how people tried to make them work differently. April 5th, 1943. The newly promoted warrant officer Walter Jenkins arrived at the nondescript brick building in Arlington, Virginia, that housed the Technical Analysis Division of the OSS. Unlike the basement workshop where he had spent the previous months, this facility was modern and well-equipped, with large windows allowing natural light to flood the workspace. As Walter placed his toolbox on an empty desk, he noticed the curious glances from the other analysts, most of them white men with advanced degrees in engineering or mathematics. He had been expecting this. What he hadn't expected was the tall, distinguished man who approached him with an outstretched hand. "Warrant Officer Jenkins, I presume. I'm Professor Harold Miller, formerly of MIT. I've heard a great deal about your work on the German encryption device. Quite remarkable." Walter shook the professor's hand, surprised by the warm greeting. "Thank you, sir. I'm still getting used to the title." Professor Miller smiled. "Titles are merely formalities. Results are what matter in this division. And your results speak for themselves. 60 German agents identified in 1 month, that's unprecedented." "Actually, sir, the count reached 63 this morning," came a familiar voice. Walter turned to see Eleanor Hayes approaching, a file folder tucked under her arm. 3 more were apprehended in Baltimore overnight. Walter couldn't help but smile at her unexpected presence. "Miss Hayes, Eleanor, I didn't realize you'd be joining this division as well. Colonel Donovan thought our collaborative approach was worth continuing," she explained. "He's assigned me as the cryptographic specialist attached to your team." Professor Miller nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Now let's get you both briefed on our current projects. We've received intelligence about several new German communication methods that might benefit from your particular perspective." As they followed Professor Miller deeper into the facility, Walter observed that this was a different world from the rigid hierarchy of his previous assignment. Here, expertise seemed to trump rank and background, at least within these walls. It was a refreshing change, though Walter harbored no illusions about the world beyond this building. The conference room was filled with maps, technical diagrams, and photographs pinned to corkboards. 8 other analysts were already seated around a large table, their conversations falling silent as Walter and Eleanor entered with Professor Miller. "Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Miller announced, "I'd like to introduce Warrant Officer Walter Jenkins and Miss Eleanor Hayes, who have joined us from Captain Holloway's division. They're responsible for cracking the mechanical cipher that led to the identification of the East Coast spy network." There were murmurs of acknowledgement around the table, ranging from genuine interest to barely disguised skepticism. Walter had grown accustomed to such reactions and took a seat without comment. Professor Miller continued, "We've been tasked with analyzing several new pieces of German technology recently acquired through various channels. One in particular seems to align with Warrant Officer Jenkins' expertise." He placed a folder in front of Walter. "This device was recovered from a German courier intercepted near the Swiss border. Initial analysis suggests it's some kind of specialized mechanical calculator, but its exact purpose remains unclear." Walter opened the folder to find photographs and technical drawings of a device significantly more complex than the one he had previously analyzed. His mind immediately began breaking down the mechanical relationships between its components. "The OSS technical team in Europe has sent us their preliminary findings," Professor Miller explained, "but they're missing something. That's where you come in." For the remainder of that day, Walter immersed himself in studying the device, occasionally consulting with Eleanor or Professor Miller. By evening, he had developed several theories about its function, but needed more information to confirm them. As the other analysts began leaving for the day, Eleanor stopped by Walter's desk. "First impressions?" she asked. Walter rubbed his tired eyes. "It's definitely not a calculator, despite the appearance. The gear ratios are all wrong for mathematical operations. I think it's another encoding device, but it's far more sophisticated than the previous one. The mechanical complexity suggests it's designed for a different type of communication channel, possibly wireless." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "That aligns with some recent intelligence. We've intercepted an increased volume of German radio transmissions that don't match any known encoding patterns. They appear to be ordinary weather reports or agricultural bulletins, but the frequency and timing are suspicious." "Could you get me copies of those transmissions?" Walter asked. "I'll have them on your desk first thing tomorrow," Eleanor promised. The next morning, Walter arrived early to find not only the requested transmissions, but also a note from Colonel Donovan himself, commending him on the continued success of his methodology. The East Coast spy network had been completely dismantled, with the final count standing at 67 agents, all identified and apprehended within a month of Walter's initial discovery. As Walter settled at his desk, he was surprised by a visit from Captain Holloway. "Just checking in on my former mechanic," Captain Holloway said with a smile. "How are you adjusting to the new assignment?" "Still finding my footing, sir," Walter admitted, "but the work is fascinating. Professor Miller seems more interested in results than in who produces them." "Miller is one of the good ones," Captain Holloway agreed. "He was instrumental in convincing Colonel Donovan to approve your transfer. He reviewed your work on the encryption device and immediately recognized its significance." The captain lowered his voice. "Between us, your discovery has caused quite a stir at the highest levels. The Director of Military Intelligence personally requested a briefing on your methodology." Walter's eyebrows rose in surprise. "I hadn't realized it reached that far up the chain, sir." "Jenkins, what you did wasn't just crack a code. You identified a fundamentally new approach to hiding information, one that had eluded our best minds for nearly a year. That kind of insight is rare and valuable." Captain Holloway glanced at the materials spread across Walter's desk. "I see they've already got you working on something new." "Yes, sir. Another device, possibly related to radio transmissions this time." Captain Holloway nodded. "Good hunting, then. I know better than to bet against you when it comes to mechanical puzzles." After Captain Holloway departed, Walter spent several hours comparing the intercepted radio transmissions with the technical specifications of the new device. By mid-afternoon, he began to see a pattern emerging, one that was both ingenious and disturbing. "Eleanor," he called across the room, "could you come take a look at this?" Eleanor joined him at his desk, and Walter pointed to his notes. "I believe this device is designed to encode information within radio transmissions by manipulating the timing between standardized phrases. The gears create specific intervals, microseconds of difference that wouldn't be noticeable to a human listener, but could be detected by a specially calibrated receiver. That's incredibly sophisticated, Eleanor said, examining his calculations. If you're right, they could be transmitting entire messages hidden within routine broadcasts, and our standard monitoring equipment wouldn't detect anything unusual. Walter nodded grimly. And based on the complexity of this device, I believe it's intended for high-priority communications, possibly direct from German High Command to field operatives. Eleanor's eyes widened. We need to brief Professor Miller immediately. Within the hour, Walter and Eleanor were explaining their findings to Professor Miller and two senior OSS communications specialists. The implications were significant. If the Germans were using this technology for high-level communications, the Allies might have been missing critical intelligence for months. The genius of this approach, Walter explained, is that it doesn't alter the content of the message at all, just the timing between standardized phrases. Since monitoring stations are primarily concerned with the content, these microsecond variations would go completely unnoticed. Professor Miller looked troubled. How difficult would it be to detect these transmissions? With standard equipment, nearly impossible, Walter admitted. But if we modify our receivers to measure and record these timing intervals, we could potentially decode them. How quickly can we implement such modifications? One of the communications specialists asked. Walter considered the question. The basic modification is relatively straightforward. I could design a prototype within a few days. The challenge will be producing enough modified receivers to cover all monitoring stations. You'll have whatever resources you need, Professor Miller declared. This could be a significant breakthrough. Over the next week, Walter worked tirelessly to design and build a prototype receiver capable of detecting the microsecond variations in transmission timing. Eleanor collaborated closely with him, applying her cryptographic expertise to develop algorithms for decoding the patterns once detected. Their partnership had evolved into a seamless collaboration, each complementing the other's strengths. Walter provided the mechanical insights and practical engineering solutions, while Eleanor contributed theoretical frameworks and mathematical precision. Together they formed a formidable team that quickly earned the respect of the entire division. On April 15th, they were ready to test their modified receiver on live German transmissions. The atmosphere in the monitoring room was tense as Walter made final adjustments to the equipment, while Eleanor prepared to analyze the incoming data. Transmission detected, announced the radio operator. Standard weather report from the Frankfurt station. Walter carefully monitored the readings as the transmission continued. I'm seeing irregular timing patterns, definitely not random variations. Eleanor leaned forward, watching the numbers being recorded. There's a clear pattern here, similar to what we saw with the mechanical device, but more complex. For the next hour, they recorded and analyzed multiple German transmissions, each showing the same telltale signs of hidden timing variations. By the end of the session, they had accumulated enough data to attempt a preliminary decoding. Working late into the night, Eleanor applied her decryption algorithms to the recorded timing patterns, while Walter refined the receiver's sensitivity. Around midnight, Eleanor suddenly gasped. "Walter, look at this!" Her voice was tight with excitement. Walter joined her at the decoding table, where she had arranged the decrypted fragments into a coherent message. What they saw sent a chill through both of them. Operation Summer Rain. Commenced June 15. Coastal targets. Walter read aloud. "This isn't just routine intelligence," Eleanor whispered. "This appears to be operational planning for something significant." Walter nodded gravely. "We need to get this to Colonel Donovan immediately." By the following morning, their discovery had triggered a flurry of activity throughout the OSS. Additional monitoring stations were hastily equipped with modified receivers, and cryptanalysts were reassigned to focus exclusively on the newly intercepted communications. Colonel Donovan himself visited the Technical Analysis Division to review their findings. "Jenkins, Hayes, I want to personally commend you both. This discovery may prove even more significant than your previous work." "Thank you, sir," Walter replied. "We believe this communication method is reserved for high-priority operational planning. The transmissions we've decoded so far suggest preparations for increased activities along the eastern seaboard. Colonel Donovan's expression was grave. That aligns with other intelligence we've received. There are indications that German naval forces may be planning a renewed submarine campaign against Allied shipping. If we can intercept their operational communications in advance, we might be able to counter their strategy before it begins, Eleanor finished. Precisely, Colonel Donovan agreed. Continue your work with the highest priority. Professor Miller will ensure you have whatever resources you require. As the colonel departed, Professor Miller approached them. You've both done exceptional work, but I want to prepare you. Your discovery has attracted attention beyond the OSS. The Army Signal Corps and Naval Intelligence are both sending representatives to evaluate your methodology. Walter had expected this development, but felt a familiar unease. His experiences had taught him that recognition often brought increased scrutiny, and for a black man in 1943 America, scrutiny rarely led to positive outcomes. Eleanor seemed to sense his concern. "We'll present our findings together," she said firmly. This was a collaborative effort. The representatives arrived the following day, a Navy commander named Richardson and an Army colonel named Whitfield. Their initial skepticism was evident as Walter explained the mechanical principles behind their discovery. "You expect us to believe that a mechanic identified a communication method that eluded our entire signals intelligence apparatus?" Colonel Whitfield asked, making little effort to hide his disbelief. "With respect, sir," Eleanor interjected, "Warrant Officer Jenkins possesses a unique understanding of mechanical systems and pattern recognition that proved invaluable in this case. Our combined approach, mechanical analysis and cryptographic application, succeeded where conventional methods had failed." Commander Richardson studied the modified receiver with greater interest. "The concept is sound, I'll grant you that. Timing variations would indeed be extremely difficult to detect without specialized equipment." He looked at Walter with newfound respect. "This modification is quite ingenious." Colonel Whitfield remained unconvinced. "Even if the methodology is valid, implementing it across all monitoring stations would require significant resources. Resources that might be better allocated elsewhere unless we can demonstrate a substantial intelligence advantage." "Perhaps a practical demonstration would be more persuasive," Professor Miller suggested. "We've scheduled a monitoring session for 1400 hours today. If you gentlemen would care to observe." The demonstration proved even more successful than they had hoped. During a 2-hour monitoring session, they intercepted and decoded 3 separate German transmissions, each containing specific operational details about submarine deployments and targeting priorities. "This is remarkable," Colonel Whitfield admitted, his earlier skepticism visibly diminished. Commander Richardson was more enthusiastic. "This could revolutionize our counterintelligence capabilities. If we can consistently intercept and decode these communications, we could anticipate German naval movements before they occur." By the end of April, Walter and Eleanor's methodology had been implemented at major monitoring stations along the East Coast, with plans to expand to Allied facilities in Europe. The intelligence gathered through their modified receivers had already proven invaluable, providing advance warning of German submarine movements and allowing Allied convoys to adjust their routes accordingly. On May 1st, Walter received a surprising invitation to attend a high-level briefing at the Pentagon. Eleanor would accompany him, along with Professor Miller and Captain Holloway. The purpose of the meeting wasn't specified, but Captain Holloway hinted that it related to the broader application of their discovery. The Pentagon was imposing, its massive corridors and numerous checkpoints designed to intimidate. Walter, in his warrant officer's uniform, drew curious and often disapproving glances from passing military personnel. Despite his contributions, he remained an anomaly, a black officer in spaces traditionally reserved for white men. The briefing room was filled with high-ranking officers from various military branches when they arrived. Walter recognized Admiral Ernest King, the commander-in-chief of the U.S. fleet, and several other flag officers whose faces he had seen in newspapers. The presentation was led by Commander Richardson, who detailed the success of the modified monitoring systems and the intelligence advantages they had provided. Throughout the briefing, Walter noticed that while his and Eleanor's methodology was extensively praised, their names were mentioned only in passing. After the formal presentation, the officers broke into smaller discussion groups. Walter found himself approached by a brigadier general he didn't recognize. "Jenkins, isn't it?" the general said. "That's quite a contribution you've made. Unconventional thinking, but effective." "Thank you, sir," Walter replied, standing at attention. "At ease, warrant officer. I'm General Davis, Army Air Forces. I understand you were a mechanic before all this." Walter was stunned to realize he was speaking to Brigadier General Benjamin O. Davis, Sr., the first black general officer in the United States military. "Yes, sir. I had a repair shop in Harlem." General Davis nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the most valuable perspectives come from outside the established system. Your work here demonstrates that." He lowered his voice. "It won't be easy. There are many who will resist acknowledging your contributions simply because of who you are. But what you've done matters, Jenkins. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Before Walter could respond, Captain Holloway approached. "Excuse me, General. Warrant Officer Jenkins is needed for a technical consultation." As they walked away, Captain Holloway explained in a hushed voice, "Admiral King has requested a private demonstration of your modified receiver. This could lead to Navy-wide implementation." The private demonstration for Admiral King and his staff took place in a secure room adjacent to the briefing area. Walter explained the technical aspects, while Eleanor covered the cryptographic methodology. Admiral King, known for his brusque manner and exacting standards, asked pointed questions that revealed a deep understanding of both mechanical engineering and cryptography. "Ingenious," the Admiral concluded, after nearly an hour of detailed discussion. "And you say this can be implemented using existing equipment with relatively minor modifications?" "Yes, sir," Walter confirmed. "The basic modification requires only standard components. The more challenging aspect is training personnel to recognize and interpret the timing patterns." Admiral King turned to Eleanor. "And your decryption algorithms, Miss Hayes, how transferable are they to other personnel?" "With proper training, sir. Any competent cryptanalyst could apply them. We've prepared detailed documentation and training materials." The Admiral nodded, clearly satisfied. "Captain Holloway, please convey my compliments to Colonel Donovan. This is precisely the kind of innovative thinking we need." He turned back to Walter and Eleanor. "Your country owes you both a debt of gratitude, one that likely won't be properly acknowledged in your lifetimes, but know that your work will save countless lives." Following the Pentagon briefing, the implementation of Walter and Eleanor's methodology accelerated dramatically. By mid-May, modified receivers were operating at every major Allied monitoring station, providing unprecedented insight into German naval operations. The intelligence gathered proved particularly valuable as Allied forces prepared for the coming invasion of Sicily. German communications intercepted through the modified receivers revealed defensive preparations and troop movements that would directly influence Allied planning. On May 20th, Walter and Eleanor were summoned to Colonel Donovan's office. The OSS director was not alone. Beside him stood a British officer whose insignia identified him as a brigadier in the Intelligence Corps. "Jenkins, Hayes, this is Brigadier William Cavendish from British Military Intelligence," Colonel Donovan introduced them. "He's here to discuss the potential application of your methodology in the European theatre." Brigadier Cavendish shook their hands with genuine warmth. "What you've accomplished is extraordinary. Our cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park are most eager to incorporate your insights into their operations." Walter was momentarily speechless. Bletchley Park was Britain's top-secret code-breaking centre, where some of the finest mathematical minds in the world worked to decipher German communications. The thought that his mechanical insights would be implemented there was overwhelming. "We're honoured, sir," Eleanor responded. "Though I should clarify that the core mechanical analysis was Warrant Officer Jenkins' work. My contribution was primarily in applying cryptographic principles to his findings." Brigadier Cavendish nodded. "Yes, quite. We're particularly interested in your approach, Warrant Officer. It represents a fundamentally different perspective from the mathematical models our people have been employing." For the next 2 hours, they discussed the technical details of implementing their methodology across British monitoring stations. The brigadier was particularly interested in Walter's insights regarding other potential German communication methods that might employ similar mechanical principles. "The Germans are nothing if not methodical," Walter explained. "If this approach has proven successful for them, they've likely developed variations for different communication channels. I've been analyzing other intercepted transmissions for similar patterns." "Have you found any?" the brigadier asked eagerly. Walter hesitated before responding. "Nothing definitive yet, sir, but there are anomalies in certain diplomatic communications that warrant further investigation." Colonel Donovan leaned forward. "What kind of anomalies, Jenkins?" "Subtle inconsistencies in formatting and paragraph structure, sir. They don't match the timing pattern we've identified, but they appear too regular to be accidental. I believe they may represent another encoding method based on similar principles, but adapted for written rather than broadcast communications." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If Walter's suspicions were correct, they might have stumbled upon yet another channel of German intelligence that had gone undetected. "I want you to pursue this immediately," Colonel Donovan ordered. "Brigadier, would you be willing to share relevant diplomatic intercepts from your side?" "Absolutely," the British officer agreed. "If Jenkins is correct, this could be vital for our combined operations." By early June, Walter and Eleanor had expanded their investigation to include diplomatic communications and written intelligence. Their modified methodology successfully identified a pattern of encoded information hidden within seemingly routine diplomatic correspondence. Information that included specific details about German defensive positions along the French coast. On June 10th, their work received the highest possible validation when a personal commendation arrived from Prime Minister Winston Churchill, thanking them for their invaluable contribution to the Allied intelligence effort. The commendation was accompanied by a confidential report detailing how their methodology had directly influenced operational planning for upcoming military actions. Despite these accolades, Walter remained keenly aware of the limitations placed on him by the society he served. Within the confines of the OSS, and among those who understood the significance of his work, he was respected for his contributions. Beyond those boundaries, he was still subject to the same prejudices and restrictions that affected all Black Americans. This reality was starkly illustrated when, in late June, Walter attempted to dine at a restaurant near the Arlington facility and was refused service. The same day, he received word that his methodology had helped prevent a German submarine attack that might have cost hundreds of American lives. Eleanor, who had witnessed the restaurant incident, was outraged. "It's unconscionable," she fumed as they walked back to the facility. "After everything you've contributed—" "It's the world we live in," Walter interrupted gently. "The work matters. The rest will take time to change." Eleanor fell silent, then said quietly, "It will change. It has to." As summer progressed, their work continued to yield critical intelligence. The Operation Summer Rain they had initially detected turned out to be a major German naval offensive aimed at disrupting Allied supply lines. Thanks to the advance warning provided by their intercepted communications, Allied naval forces were perfectly positioned to counter the German submarines, resulting in the destruction of 15 U-boats with minimal Allied losses. By July, Walter and Eleanor's methodology had been fully integrated into the Allied intelligence apparatus, their modified receivers becoming standard equipment at monitoring stations worldwide. The German naval codes, once virtually impenetrable, had become an open book to Allied intelligence, providing a decisive advantage in the Battle of the Atlantic. On August 15, 1943, exactly 5 months after Walter had first identified the unusual pattern in the German encryption device, he and Eleanor were summoned to a private ceremony at OSS headquarters. Colonel Donovan presented them both with the Intelligence Star, one of the highest honors bestowed by the agency, in recognition of their exceptional contributions to national security. The ceremony was deliberately kept small and confidential. Walter's race and Eleanor's gender made a more public acknowledgement politically complicated in 1943 America. But those present, including Captain Holloway, Professor Miller, and representatives from the various military intelligence services, understood the true significance of their achievements. "Jenkins, Hayes," Colonel Donovan said as he concluded the ceremony, "what you have accomplished may never be fully known outside this room. The nature of our work demands secrecy, and the full impact of your contributions may not be recognized for decades, if ever. But know this, your insights and methodology have saved countless lives and significantly advanced the Allied cause. History may not record your names, but the effects of your work will be felt long after this conflict ends." After the ceremony, as Walter and Eleanor stood in the courtyard of the OSS headquarters, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if Captain Holloway hadn't brought you that device back in March? If someone else had been assigned to repair it?" Walter considered the question. Someone else might have eventually noticed the pattern, but maybe not in time to stop those 60 agents before they did real damage, maybe not in time to warn those convoys, maybe not in time to prepare for Operation Summer Rain. He smiled slightly. "Timing matters, in mechanical systems and in life." Eleanor nodded. "Like those microsecond variations you identified, small differences that change everything." "Exactly," Walter agreed. "Small differences, different perspectives, seeing patterns where others don't. Those things matter, not just in war, but in everything." As they walked back toward the Technical Analysis Division, where new challenges awaited them, Walter reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a damaged German device in a basement workshop. His unique perspective, shaped by his experiences as a mechanic, as a black man navigating a segregated society, as someone accustomed to finding unconventional solutions with limited resources, had proven invaluable in ways no one could have anticipated. The war would continue, with its triumphs and tragedies, its moments of courage and despair. Walter's contributions would remain largely unknown to the general public, classified and hidden within the shadowy world of intelligence operations. But he had demonstrated, in the most consequential way possible, that valuable insights could come from unexpected sources, and that sometimes the ability to see what others miss might just change the course of history. In the years following the war, Walter Jenkins would return to Harlem, where he would open an engineering firm specializing in innovative mechanical solutions. The lessons he had learned during those critical months in 1943 about patterns, perspective, and the power of unconventional thinking would inform his approach to every challenge he encountered. And while the full story of how one black mechanic's code-breaking method exposed 60 German spies in 1 month would remain classified for decades, the ripples of that discovery would continue to influence intelligence methodology throughout the Cold War and beyond. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.